speak on immigration or immigrant memories. Was not able to make it, had a change in his schedule, and so Kathy will be talking to us about the commemorative piers that are located along 5th Street here in downtown Ames, and the history that they present for the downtown area. Kathy is a former, many years, co-president of the association, and so I introduce Kathy Svec.
Our originally scheduled speaker, Mark Barron, sends his sincere apologies. There was a serious health emergency in his extended family, and he is down in Georgia at the moment. But I know that there were many of you who are looking forward to his topic, immigration into Story County, and he has promised that he will reschedule that talk. So those of you who are on our email newsletter will definitely get that news. We'll work with Mark to make sure that that happens. But I hope that you're not disappointed that I'm up here instead of Mark, and we'll carry on from here. Before I get started, since we're really focusing a lot on the history of Main Street in these piers, as I'm sure that many of you saw, or I hope that many of you saw the news in the Tribune, that the whole Main Street area has been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. Woohoo! This is so exciting. Many years of hard work. That application process is not simple, and I'm here to tell you. So once it was submitted, then you wait because it has to be approved at the state level in addition to the national level. But that really puts our Main Street on the map, and with the adjoining neighborhood just north, of course, with Old Town. So very exciting history-related news in the Tribune today. So we are going to take a seated walking tour, and we developed this tour after these brick piers were installed. And I actually took a group on a walking tour, and it turned out to be really hot and extremely noisy because a big section of it is along the Syride route. And we discovered that it was a much nicer tour with having this air-conditioned room and having you all seated. So here we go on the walking tour, the seated walking tour of the 5th Street piers. So all up and down 5th Street, there are 16 brick piers inset with interpretive terracotta clay tiles that begin to tell the story of people, places, and events in the city's history. In total, there are 17 unique designs, and with each of the 16 piers able to display 2 tiles, that means 32 total tiles up and down 5th Street. Now, each of those piers with their tiles were placed where possible close to the entity that they picture. So there was some thought and logic that went into the placement. But before I talk about the piers, I wanted to give you just a little bigger story about the design. In 1999, the Ames City Council awarded a $50,000 contract for downtown artwork. The Historic Piers project also was funded in part by a $15,000 grant from the Iowa Department of Cultural Affairs Iowa Community Cultural Grants Program. The City of Ames Public Art Commission coordinated the project. Iowa sculptor David Dahlquist was selected to design the tiles. And David has really become quite famous across the state because he has designed many of the unique rest stops along Interstate 80 and 35. So hopefully some of you have stopped at those. They have different themes. I've seen a quilt one, a Civil War one. Many of those were David Dahlquist designs. So I'm really pleased to have David Dahlquist designs in our community. David consulted with Ames historian Farwell Brown and looked at many, many, many historic pictures of Ames. The tiles were then created by artists at Dahlquist Clayworks in Des Moines. The tiles' simple images are meant to inspire further investigation. The Fifth Street piers were meant to complement the streetscape design that Dahlquist created for Main Street. Those design elements were direct references to Ames' founding by the railroad. The large lanterns at certain intersections are a reference to the lanterns used for signaling on trains and in rail yards, and were made from leftover steel stamp outs from John Deere's tool making. And if you look really close, for example, right here, it's the outline of a wrench. Can you see it? It's kind of the negative, and so you have to kind of translate it to the positive. And then, of course, these patterns of the tile in the sidewalks were meant to simulate railroad tracks. I'll bet you didn't know that walking down the street on Main Street, what all of that was about. Oh, here, this is the one where you can really see the wrench designs very much. This is at Kellogg. And then this is some other part. I've often wondered what some of these parts are in some of these other stamp outs. But this was all scrap metal that he repurposed from John Deere. Let me find my place here. Now, the intersection at Kellogg and Main is inset with a circle. Right here, can you see it? And here, you really need kind of an aerial view of that. The circle represents the roundhouse that used to be behind Main Street until 1902. It's hard to imagine that there was a roundhouse behind Main Street. I think it was down sort of toward the west end near Burnett. A roundhouse is a carousel that is used to turn locomotives around. And this was prior to the time that locomotives could go in reverse. So they needed to be spun around on a big carousel. This is a model down in the lower right-hand corner, but hopefully you can kind of get the idea. The Ames Roundhouse could accommodate 2 locomotives. When technology improved and locomotives were able to go in reverse, the roundhouse was no longer needed. Now, the piers themselves were designed to reflect patterns of bricks that appear at the cornices of Main Street's older buildings. The piers are actually made of small-scale bricks, not full-scale bricks. And those small bricks were actually cut in half to achieve the proper scale. So you see here, this little decorative pattern kind of picks up some of the patterns that you will see up above on Main Street. So David Dahlquist was really very observant and thoughtful as he was creating these designs. And of course, so many of the original buildings were made of brick, so the brick piers seem to be the obvious design element. So this is a map of where the piers are located. And they start down here at Duff with 3. And they put them wherever there really was space for them. And then this little arrow down here at 29 through 32 is actually one more block down. There's that little short 1-block street called Pearl that parallels Grand between 5th and Main. And the very last piers are down at Pearl and 5th Street. So that's the route if you're actually taking a walk. You can see on the listing on the side that there are some repeats. There are some singles, one tile only, but a number of them, most of them, are repeated at least twice. So I'm going to start with pier number 1 down by Duff Avenue. Pier number 1 features Old Ames. His lifespan was 1804 to 1873. Oakes was a manufacturer of picks and shovels in Massachusetts who served as a representative in the U.S. Congress from 1863 to 1873. He is credited with promoting and financially supporting the Union Pacific portion of the Transcontinental Railroad. John Blair, who brought the railroad through Iowa, named the town of Ames after his good friend, Oaks Ames. Though Oaks Ames never set foot in the new town that bore his name, he did present a bell to the community church, a gift that is symbolized in this tile. The bell is still in use in the tower of the United Church of Christ Congregational on the northeast corner of 6th Street and Kellogg Avenue. And when, a year ago, when there was a tour of the new historical plaques that have been placed on historic buildings in downtown Ames, the UCC church was open, and they let anybody who wanted to come in and ring the bell. Oh, what a great experience. I loved it. But it is so historic, the gift from our names, the namesake of our town. Pier number 2, the Intelligencer. The Intelligencer was established in 1868, just 4 years after the founding of our town. It was the new community's first continuously published newspaper. It was at first a weekly publication and went to daily in 1911. Tribune was adopted as part of its name in May 1913. Over the years, the newspaper went through many mergers and name changes, and today it is known simply as the Ames Tribune. Now, an interesting footnote is that the names of the artists who worked on the Historic Piers project are listed on this tile. Isn't that cool? So there they are. There's David Dahlquist's name, for example, right there. So that's a fun little footnote for that one. Pier number 3, rails to trails. Through the years, trains and bicycles have played important but changing roles in moving Ames residents from place to place. As rail passenger transportation declined, the Iowa Department of Transportation and the City of Ames have converted abandoned rail lines into trails for walking, jogging, and cycling. These trails connect to others throughout Ames and beyond. This movement began in the early to mid-1980s. Iowa has a number of rail trails that connect to other trail systems. Interestingly, David Dahlquist also created the design for the High Trestle Trail, that unique, wonderful feature. I have yet to see that at night. Has anyone else seen that at night? Ooh, it's wonderful. Yes, that's what I hear. And that was an attempt to mimic the shaft of a coal mine. And there was coal mining in central Iowa in the early years, and he wanted to visually comment on that particular history. Nancy and Archie Martin are on pier number 5. Nancy Martin and Archie Martin founded a prominent Ames African-American family. They moved to Iowa from Georgia sometime between 1913 and 1915 with many of their adult children. Archie, who lived to be 102 years old, was privileged to know 32 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren. The couple's descendants have made significant contributions both to the Ames community and to the country as a whole through their distinguished careers, particularly in health, education, and military service. This tile and the next one, number 6, were dedicated in February 2002, slightly more than 2 years after the other 15 were installed. And this new additional pier was the initiative of the Archie and Nancy Martin Foundation that solicited funds for the 2 Martin tiles and the pier on which they appear. Nancy Martin's lifespan was 1856 to 1947. Archie, 1857 to 1960. 102 years. Amazing. Nancy and Archie's house, built in 1919 and still standing at 218 Lincoln Way, was home for many African American students at Iowa State College during the first half of the 20th century. During this era, students of color were admitted to the college, But college housing policies made it almost impossible for them to live on campus because they were required to have a roommate of color. For over 25 years, the Martins provided a home for many of these students, and Archie Martin advocated for the rights of minority students. The Martin House is now registered as an Ames historic landmark. The importance of the Martin family was recognized in 2004 with the dedication of Martin Hall, a newly built dormitory on the Iowa State University campus, down there on the lower right. Just recently, the Martin family has initiated a GoFundMe website. The house needs some restoration and renovation, and they are hunting for people who can support them. Captain Wallace Greeley came to Ames in 1866 after serving in the Union Army in the U.S. Civil War. He and his wife, Mary, purchased land a short distance south of the Iowa State College campus where they farmed until 1876. And this is roughly in the area where Green Hills Community stands today. That year, 1876, they moved to town to a house on Douglas around 11th Street. In 1881, he founded Ames' first corporate bank, the Union National Bank, on the northwest corner of Douglas Avenue and what was then called Onondaga Street. Onondaga was changed, the name was changed to Main Street in 1910. In 1882, the couple established their second home on the site of the first house in Ames. That first house was built by a man named Noah Webster. I don't think he's any relation to the dictionary guy. The Greeleys donated land on Douglas opposite their home to the town, and in 1903-1904, the original Ames Public Library was built there, funded by a $10,000 gift from Andrew Carnegie. Captain Greeley was mayor of Ames from 1888 to 1890 and served 3 terms in the Iowa General Assembly. When Mary died in 1914, it became Captain Greeley's mission to establish a hospital in Ames in her honor. Mary Greeley Hospital was dedicated in 1916. And I can't help but think how proud Wallace and Mary would be of the Mary Greeley Medical Center. Wallace's lifespan was 1838 to 1917, so he died just a year after he dedicated the hospital. Mary's lifespan was 1847 to 1914. And it's so ironic to me, their first little in-town house at 11th and Douglas is now covered with parking lots for the hospital. There is irony in that, I think. By the way, the picture, that is the sum total of that little hospital that opened in 1916. There are beautiful south-facing windows, because at that time there was a belief that sunshine was very restorative. And the matron of the hospital, who supervised all the nurses, actually had a little apartment right in the hospital. So she lived there and worked there, and it was really her whole life. Yeah.
You might mention that the Greeley house is still over there.
Thank you, Peter. Good grief. Yes, Adam's Funeral Home, right across the street, was the Greeley Mansion. And it has had several additions put onto it. But it is still, when you walk in the front door, it's still very obvious that it was a very gracious residence during its time period. Thank you for mentioning that. I need to add that to this script. Fargo Tilden Brown attended Ames Public Schools and earned a degree in agricultural economics from Iowa State College in 1934. After retiring from his position as real estate appraiser for the Iowa Department of Transportation in 1976, he devoted his retirement years to gathering and assembling the history of his community. His photographic archive is available both in paper and digital format. That digital format through the Ames Public Library website. The paper copies we actually have over at the Ames History Center. Farwell Brown authored a series of 3 books of Ames stories entitled Ames in Word and Pictures, published in 1993, 1999, and 2003. In 1981, Brown became a founder and the first president of the Ames Heritage Association, now called the Ames Historical Society. The city of Ames proclaimed him the city's first official historian in 1986. Other local named recognition includes this room here in the Ames Public Library, which is the Farwell T. Brown Auditorium, and Ames Historical Society's annual Farwell T. Brown Award for recognized service to the Ames Historical Society. I'm always amazed at Farwell Brown because many of us knew him as the Ames historian, and he was not that interested in Ames history prior to his retirement. So in 1976, when he retired from the DOT, he began his whole second career as the Ames historian, and was really living Ames history right to the end of his life. He was born in 1910 and died in 2010, just like a month short of his 100th birthday. This is the Iowa Department of Transportation. Established in 1904 as the Iowa Highway Commission, the Iowa Department of Transportation originally was a part of the Department of Engineering at Iowa State College. Its mission was to be an advisory agency, providing guidance on road building matters to counties and cities within the state. In 1913, the General Assembly enlarged the Commission's responsibilities to include the standardization of bridge design. Federal engineers were soon reporting that Iowa had the, quote, best bridge and culvert designs of any state in the Union, unquote. The Commission staff moved into their new headquarters on Lincoln Way in 1924. The Commission became the Iowa Department of Transportation in 1974, bringing all modes of transportation operating within the state under one administrative headquarters in Ames. Most DOTs are in their state's capital cities, but because of the unique circumstances of ours being founded at Iowa State, the DOT has remained in Ames. I think there's an opinion among some DOT people that they're just darn glad that they're not down in Des Moines. So, and we certainly are glad to have them here in Ames. John Blair. Railroad magnate John Ainsley Blair was born in Fowl Rift, New Jersey. As a successful industrialist, he recognized the pressing needs for railroads in developing the midsection of the country. Blair first came through Iowa in 1860 when he brought the railroad that became the Chicago and Northwestern, when he bought it. In December 1864, he directed one of his engineers to plat a town between two streams in Story County and to give that town the name Ames, after his good friend Oaks Ames. Blair obtained right-of-way for his new railroad through what is now the Main Street Cultural District. He also selected street names in the original town of Ames and donated land for the town's first park, which we now know as the Bandshell Park, a gift to the railroad. It was his railroad that put Ames on the first transcontinental system when the Golden Spike was driven at Promontory Point, Utah on May 10, 1869, uniting the Union Pacific and Central Pacific railroads. As president of 16 railroad companies, he amassed in his lifetime a fortune estimated at $70 million. By the time of his death, he was the largest owner of rail mileage in the world. His Presbyterian religion and his penchant for philanthropy led him to found more than 100 churches in proximity to his railroads. And he deeded the land for the Congregational Church, which is at 6th and Kellogg. Blair's lifetime spanned 1802 to 1899. So he lived to be a grand old guy. Hiram Lester Munn was one of Ames' many Civil War veterans. He moved from his home state of New York to Oxford, Iowa in 1886, where he operated a lumberyard. In 1891, he was on the train determined to move further west. but he stopped overnight in Ames, and local businessmen cornered him, learned what he was about, and convinced him to stay right here in Ames. So from Oxford to Ames, he didn't get very far, but he did move to Ames and opened the H.L. Munn Lumber Company on the northeast corner of Onondaga and Duff. Onondaga, of course, is Main Street, where 5 generations of the Munn family continued to operate the business for over 100 years. In 1998, his great-great-grandson, Eric Munn, closed the downtown operations in favor of a larger operation on Airport Road. The original buildings were leveled by fire in 2001. That was a sad day. The Sheldon Munn Hotel, which opened its doors for the first time in 1916 on the corner of Kellogg and Main, owed most of its financing to banker and mayor Parley Sheldon and Alfred Herschel Munn, known as Fred, who was H.L. Munn's son. So the Munn name is well ingrained in Ames history. Certainly some of you shopped at Munn Lumber when it was here on Main Street. The Dickey, yes, the Dickey. The Ames and College Railway was known as either the motor line or affectionately as the Dinky because of the diminutive size of its donkey steam locomotive. Incorporated in 1890 as the Ames Street Railway Company, it made its first run to the Iowa Agricultural College campus on July 4th, 1891. Besides carrying the hundreds of passengers who rode the line back and forth from town to campus each day, the Dinky also delivered mail and baggage to campus, and importantly, it also conveyed building materials and equipment to construction sites on Central Campus during an era of rapid expansion. I'm pretty sure that it carried the materials for the Campanile, for example, out to campus. In 1907, the Ames and College Railway was taken over by the Fort Dodge, Des Moines and Southern Railroad and converted to an electric trolley. And the trolley system took passengers all the way to Des Moines, north to Fort Dodge and south to Des Moines. So I know that there are some older folks that might kind of have vague recollections of the trolley. The Ames and College Railway then ran from 1891 to 1907. And some historians report that the Dinky was loved and sincerely hated by college students and residents. It was a steam locomotive, it burned coal, and so there was a constant shower of cinders all the time that you were riding on the Dinky. But it was handy. I think it ran every 20 minutes or so between downtown Ames, and it really opened up the campus. Prior to the Dinky, it was very difficult to get from Ames to campus year-round because the roads were not paved. It was very weather dependent. So when the Dinky was established, people, actually faculty and administrators, could live downtown and work on campus, which they could not do prior to the establishment of the Ames and College Railroad. So it really opened up the relationship between the campus and Ames, and I really firmly believe that the good relationship that the city of Ames has with Iowa State began with the establishment of the Dinky.
And was it the railroad company or an individual that started that?
It was individual investors. Judge Stevens, that's right, Judge Stevens.
He organized a group of investors that formed the company.
Thank you. Judge Stevens and his wife Rowena, who was a very well-known suffragette. John Stevens, a very prominent lawyer and judge, organized a group of local investors, so it was all local initiative. I'm pretty sure Parley Sheldon was on that list. Maybe mine, the list of the original investors is kind of the who's who of that time period in Ames. Thank you, Peter. Onondaga. The Onondaga people are one of the original 5 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy. Their traditional homeland is in and around Onondaga County, New York, which was the home of Ames' founding mother, Cynthia Olive Kellogg Duff. She and her husband, Alexander, settled in Story County, Iowa in 1863, and this was about a year before Ames was established. The Duffs purchased 200 acres of land in Section 2 of Washington Township, which included 80 acres purchased from Lucian Hoggett, who was another very early Ames pioneer, again, another person here prior to the establishment of Ames. The Duff farm was kind of in the area up around Carr Drive, and where Carr Pool used to be. It was largely from those 80 acres that the Duffs bought from Hoggett that John Blair, in turn, purchased land from the Duffs. On this land, he commissioned a plat for the original town of Ames. Tradition has it that Mrs. Duff acted as his agent to local landowners and was thus responsible for obtaining the right-of-way Blair needed to bring the railroad through what would become Ames. Cynthia told Blair that she would like for the new town to be named Onondaga. But Blair wanted to name the new town after his friend, Oaks Ames, so he offered her naming rights for some of the streets. Because of her influence, the main business street was given the name Onondaga. When the street was paved in 1910, then it was renamed Main Street. Duff Avenue and Kellogg Avenue were also family names that were adopted in her honor. And of course, they continue as major thoroughfares in Ames. There was a 6-block street called Pearl Street that Mrs. Duff named after her father, Pearl Kellogg. But eventually, Pearl Street became part of 10th Street. Now, there is a Pearl Avenue still in Ames, but it is named for Pearl D. Hart, who was the mayor of Ames from 1958 to 1965. And that is that little 1-block street that is down at the very end of 5th Street. I'm trying to think. Herrick has his dental business on the corner of Pearl and 5th Street, so that's kind of where that is. I'm kind of glad they changed the name of Main Street. Onondaga is really quite a mouthful. George G. Tilden. George Galen Tilden moved his family from Vermont to the village of Ames in 1869, where he became a partner in a general store. This venture evolved into what would become Ames' best-known department store, Tildens, which operated for 102 years in the same location at 203 Main Street. When George died in 1892, his widow Lydia and sons, Lucian and Galen, and a man named George Huntington took over the store. It was later renamed Tilden Brothers and Company. In the same year her husband died, Lydia Cooper Tilden was elected to the Ames School Board. She was the first woman to serve as its president. In 1934, the Tildens placed their famous billboard on Highway 69 just north of Des Moines. The huge sign clearly stated to all who viewed it, "If you don't find what you need in Des Moines, try Tildens in Ames." Aggressive, I love it. Tildens closed its doors for good in 1971. Are there people here who shopped at Tildens? Yes. Yes. And I love going in the current, actually the Design on Main has that space now. And some of those features are still visible in the old Tilden store. The ONeill Dairy was founded in 1914 by John Clement ONeill, known as Clem, and his brother Patrick Henry, known as Henry. Clem was very active in the community and served on the Ames City Council for 2 years. ONeill Park in southwest Ames is named after the two brothers. The dairy was originally located at 115 Kellogg, and in 1922 it moved into the old Armory building at 308 5th Street. That picture, a corner of it is there in the lower right. And that building came down to the wrecking ball in 1985. And the spot is currently the parking lot right across from the Tribune. But the ONeills operated their dairy in that building through 1971. Dairy was renowned for its premium velvet ice cream. It was so rich in butterfat that it melted in your mouth and clung to your lips. Oh, it was delicious ice cream. ONeill Dairy. In 1858, the Iowa General Assembly established the Iowa Agricultural College west of what would become the town of Ames. So this was 1858, prior to the 1864 establishment of Ames. 2 years later, in 1860, the first building was constructed on the campus, the home of W.H. Fitzpatrick, who was the farm operator for the college. That building is now the Farmhouse Museum at Iowa State University. It was designated a land-grant college, the nation's first, in 1864. This was the result of Justin Morrill's United States legislation that established the national program which promoted technical training along with a traditional college education. Iowa Agricultural College's name was changed to Iowa State College in 1898 and to Iowa State University of Science and Technology in 1959. Oops. And of course, the Farmhouse Museum is open most days of the week, and it is a very lovely facility to tour. And they have restored it to 1910 time period, I think. But period furniture, and you really get a flavor for the early years of the college at the farmhouse. The famous discoverer of many uses of peanuts, George Washington Carver, was the first African American to graduate from Iowa Agricultural College. He earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree at IAC. He worked at the college's experiment station, and it was there that his work in plant pathology and mycology first gained him national recognition and respect as a botanist. When he completed his academic work at Iowa State in 1896, he was probably the only African American student on campus, and likely the only one in Ames. Carver received support and special attention from his botany professors Louis Pamel and Joseph Budd, head of the Department of Horticulture at IAC. Budd's daughter, Etta, taught art at Simpson College. Carver was attending Simpson as an art and music student before coming to Ames. Etta championed his academic career and encouraged him to study botany at her father's institution. Other people also recognized Carver's special qualities and his drive to obtain an education. Carver would always say that he was very well treated in Ames. After leaving Ames, he taught at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama for 47 years. In 1969, a new academic building at Iowa State University was named Carver Hall in his honor. Carver lived from 1864 to 1943. In 1865, the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad located its first depot at the Ames Station on the south side of the tracks, just west of Duff Avenue, at the east end of Onondaga Street. This little depot served as both a passenger stop and a freight station for the first 35 years of the town's existence. Not a very fancy place, but very utilitarian. A new depot was completed in 1900, designed by the well-known architectural partnership of Frost and Granger. And Frost and Granger designed many little depots across the country. The depot was located on the west end of Onondaga, now at 526 Main Street, and served as the gateway to the city for 60 years. With its beautiful gardens and walking paths, it became a well-known tourist attraction. Thousands of Iowa State students, professional people, and commercial travelers arrived in town by train. It was at the depot that these people developed their first impressions of Ames. The last scheduled passenger train traveled through Ames on March 12, 1960. almost 95 years after the first passenger had passed through town. After its use as a passenger stop, the depot was used for many years by the city of Ames for offices before it was restored for use as retail, restaurant, and office space. Actually, we are very lucky in Ames to still have our depot, mostly in its original condition. When the city sold it to a developer, they did require that at least the exterior had to remain faithful to the original design, which it mostly does. So that is the last design of our 17 tiles. And I wanted to talk just a little bit about the walking tour guides that we do have available at the Ames History Center in our museum shop. And we have 5. So I wanted to talk about them. We do have the lecture that I just gave you tonight and a walking tour. And you know, the weather is really nice. It's a great time of year to walk out and about. And it's would be a great activity for scout or 4-H groups or just company around town or just your family. So this particular brochure includes pictures of the Main Street streetscape that I talked about, the railroad theme on Main Street, and images of each of the 17 tiles plus a map. Now, they are sitting over on the side. If you could pitch a little donation into the fishbowl, we would really appreciate it, especially for these color brochures that are a little bit pricey for us. The next walking tour is for Campus Town. Now, it is currently just a black and white copy, and that one is free. And it is an interesting approach to talking about Campus Town. There are 12 sections, and it talks about each of those sections, usually street by street. And most of our other walking guides talk about individual structures. And this one is unique in talking about larger areas or larger sections. It also talks about College Creek, Lincoln Way, and several selected noteworthy buildings, both old and new. For example, he talks about Cranford Apartments, as well as the Kingland Building, which is that huge new development down on the corner of Welch and Lincoln Way. The Old Town Walking Tour is really a beautiful publication, all color. There's an excellent map locating individual structures, 36 altogether. There's also an interesting glossary of architectural terms because many of the descriptions of the individual houses refer to specific architectural elements. So that glossary is very handy in explaining exactly what it is that they're talking about. As you notice, each of the structures are featured in beautiful color. And again, a little offering of $1 would be greatly appreciated for the Old Town brochure. The History Walk through downtown Ames provides also a good map, and actually the map that is a fold-out in that brochure is based on a historical map, which is kind of fun. And there's information on 29 different structures on Main Street. And it features historic pictures of what those buildings looked like in earlier times. So if you're on the street and walking, it's handy to look at the guide to see what that building used to look like. Now this little brochure, I mentioned that the Ames Historic Preservation Commission is engaged in a project to place historical plaque information on as many of the historical buildings as they can in downtown Ames. And the funding for this has come through the city, but also the individual building owners have contributed to the cost of the plaques. So this little brochure features 21, I think, plaques. Or actually, the little map directs you to each address. And so when you're standing in front of that building, you can just stand there and read the plaque. So they've not kind of reproduced the text for the plaque in the brochure. There are very nice line drawings of some of the architectural features of those buildings. And I think when we're shopping downtown, we're so focused on the ground level that this brochure really encourages you to stand back a little bit and look up at the top of the buildings to see some of those interesting decorative details. Now, the Plaque Tour has also been digitized and is now on our website. And I'm pretty sure that if you have a tablet that gets Wi-Fi, that you can kind of pick this up maybe as you're walking down Main Street. But if you go to our website and drop down the tab that says Visit, down here you will see a category called Tours. So if you click on Tours, this is what comes up. So there are two of the brochures, the Campus Town brochure and the Old Town brochure, that you can print yourself on your own computer. You can pull them up in PDF form and print them off. And then the third window here is the online tour of the plaques, the historical plaques. So if you click on Start Here, and wait just a moment, it takes just a moment to load, then this is the first site starting at Ames City Hall. And along the bottom are color pictures of what each building looks like today, current view. And there are several little buttons that will help you. If you push this button, it takes that text away so that you can see the whole picture. And then if you push that little button again, then the text comes back so you can read it. Then up in the top corner, if you push that button, then you get an enlargement of that historic picture of that particular structure. So it comes on a little bit bigger. And then when you're done seeing that, you just exit out down in the corner. The other really neat thing is that if you push either here or here, there's this lovely voice that will read the text out loud to you. So you can just be accompanied by this lovely voice reading the panel. So we are very, very excited about this beautiful addition to our website. And of course, each of the little red arrows here indicates a building on which there is a historical plaque. And I've heard that the Ames Historic Preservation Commission is in the process of finalizing 4 more plaques. So this will be an ongoing project for Ames residents. So I hope that you will come and take a walk with us this summer downtown. I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody might have. Yeah.
Maybe this is obvious, but is there a particular significance why Old Town is called Old Town? Are just a lot of old houses, the architecture, or is there more to it than that?
Well, there is a little more to it than that. The question is, what is the significance of the neighborhood immediately north of here being called Old Town? The boundaries of Old Town, maybe Pete can jump in on this one too. The boundaries are the original plat of the city of Ames. So it is the outlines, no? It started out that way.
There are about
Here, come on here.
there are about 8 square blocks of the original town in the Old Town Historic District. Most of the Old Town Historic District is Blair's first plat, or first addition to the original town. So, but it's on, the original town only went over to Kellogg, I think. And, okay, to Burnett? Okay, and only went just short of 8th Street. So the historic district picks up the blocks north of 7th. The historic district is actually, and the neighborhood and the historic district are different, but the name of the neighborhood comes from the fact that there is the historic district, and then the neighborhood is considered to include everything from 6th to 13th Street and from Duff to Grand. But the historic district is between 7th and 9th Street from Duff to the alley west of Burnett. So, or no, the alley west of Clark, I'm
As
sorry.
I understand, it was the first development, active development by Blair.
Well, the part that's in the original town, I'm former president of the Old Town Neighborhood Association, but, and we'd like to say it's the first, but there were actually developments on the south side of the tracks that were earlier than the Blair's first edition. And actually, the Duff edition, which goes up Kellogg all the way to 13th Street, predated the Blair's first edition. So Old Town is one of the oldest neighborhoods. It was a prominent neighborhood through the years, but it's not the oldest in town. But it is the area that was designated back in 1979 as having the Old Town Historic District in it.
It's not a real clean answer.
But there was an attempt to tip the hat to the original plat, the very first residential area that Blair outlined for the city.
Most of the original town is actually commercial at this point, because it ran from the railroad tracks up to just 2 lots south of 8th Street, and most of that ended up becoming commercial.
One more question? Yeah.
Could you update us on the restoration of the hotel?
Question is, can we update on the restoration of the hotel? Short answer, no. Wish I could. I'm not sure what's going on. I know that the work is ongoing. I know that many of the units have been rented, but the renting of the commercial spaces on the ground floor have been pretty slow. So.
Yeah, maybe we'll be able to get an update into a future newsletter or something
That's
like
true.
that, if we can get the information and share it.
I've drawn the name for the winner, Candy Albaugh. Candy here? Yeah. We're going to give you that beautiful book bag, and you can put a copy of all the walking tour guides there. I'd like to thank you for coming and being patient with the switch of the topic, but I do hope you'll take a walk in Ames sometime this summer. Thank you.